Am I?
Welcome in, everybody. So glad you're here. My name is Deborah Jeffries with HR Answers, and this is our July issue of 2024 HR Lunch Bunch. And we are joined today by my dear friend, Kyra, who comes from us from Wisconsin, great state of Wisconsin. And she's going to actually chat with us a little bit about kind of strategic HR from the standpoint of being that HR business partner. And this is something that she's been doing for a while. And this is going to be a very informal introduction. And Kyra, you feel free to give more of the formal stuff. But Karen and I actually go back a little ways. She actually used to live here in the state of Oregon and work, and we got familiar with each other through the Salem chapter of SHRM. And she has moved on and up in her career and is doing great stuff. And we continue to stay connected because of SHRM and conferences and whatnot. And because of that, being able to continue to listen to her and what she's bringing to the table when it comes to HR and the people she's connected to. And when listening to and watching her Twitter posts, I thought, you know what, I'd like to have her participate in HR Lunch Bunch and bring some stuff to all of us on this end. So I asked her if she'd be willing, and she said yes. And I think we're the beneficiaries of that. So she can give us a little bit about her thoughts, but I also know she wants to engage all of us in a conversation. And if this is your first time with HR Lunch Bunch, I want you to know that this is really intended to be a discussion. This is not a class. This is intended to be an opportunity for us to share information with each other, learn from each other, sometimes the successes and sometimes maybe those pitfalls, and opportunity to maybe learnings from each other, warnings, about those pitfalls, but truly an opportunity to network. So the chat box is open to be able to use that as a form of communication if you don't want to verbalize, because you can unmute yourself. But I'll be able to facilitate that kind of thing. So Kyra, you don't have to sit there and pay attention to the chat box. Some people do that well. They can multitask, and others not so much. But I'm going to turn that over to you. As I've mentioned, I've made her co-host, which means she can take the screen away from me, and I will actually delete mine. I just wanted to have it up there so that we're kind of all on the same page about what we're doing here.
All
Or
right.
not. Let me try again. There we go.
All right, let me see if I can get this working. Am I sharing my screen?
You are sharing. I can see it.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for the introduction. And I wanted to add a little bit of detail there. When you and I first met, I had just started my career in HR. And here we are 20 some years later. And I feel old too. But it's been really fun, and it's been really fun to kind of reunite with you. I know we had the opportunity to connect last year at the SHRM conference in where were we? That was Vegas.
That was Vegas.
That was a ton of fun to have, my very first HR mentor and my most current longtime mentor all in the same place, and it just was really wonderful. So I will say this before I jump in. There's a couple things I want to say. One is this is really meant to be a discussion. I'm not here to present. I've been doing this a long time. I don't know, some people would say I'm a subject matter expert, but I feel like all of us here are experts in our field in different ways. We all bring different strengths. Our organizations are different. The industries that we come from are different, and we learn from each other. The best resources are those that are around us. Iron sharpens iron. So don't be shy about comments. Really, we're here to learn from each other. The second thing is that learn from each other, connect with each other, make sure that you are, even as an introvert, you don't need to be afraid of anybody. I know we're all busy. I know it's really hard to step away from things that we're doing at work because we're swamped and we want to get our workday done. But really, the people that we connect with make such a difference in how we are able to operate within our organization. So Just those two plugs. A little bit about myself. I go by Kai most of the time, Kyra Matkovich. I was actually born and raised in Oregon. So it's kind of, I guess, my first home. I've been in Wisconsin for about the last almost 6 years. My family and I relocated here to work for a company called Exact Sciences. We are in cancer research, diagnostics, and early screening, and it is quite the mission to be a part of. I myself am a cancer survivor, so it is a personal mission to me. But we're here to talk about HR partnering and what it means to be an HR business partner. So I have a couple of questions that are on here, but I'm really interested in hearing from you all. I'm sure you all come from different backgrounds, and I'm curious, when you think about an HR business partner, what does that mean to you? How do you operate? Or when you, let's say you even haven't had an HR business partner role, but what does that mean in terms of how that role operates within an organization? What are your thoughts on that? Feel free to unmute yourself and jump right in.
Kyra, this is Cheryl Berger. So I would share I have held the role of an HR business partner. I held that with an organization that was a subsidiary of Boeing. And so it took on a perspective of really understanding both the financial impacts of your decisions, as well as the direction of the facet of the organization that you are supporting. And so you were literally their partner as they moved forward with that program or that project, giving them a different perspective with regard to the impacts from the people side of things and the skill sets that they had in-house in that project.
Excellent, excellent. I really appreciate that. And as Boeing being a large organization, you know, when you were talking about being a part of, you know, the decision-making process, understanding the financial implications, what did that look like for you? You know, what would a typical partnering scenario look like?
A lot of it became like you would sit side by side with possibly or most probably the either vice president of that program or the senior director of that program, whoever had that program under their hat. And you would be looking at the financials, you would be looking at the people, you would be looking at the projected direction, you would be looking at the pieces of the business that needed to be developed or worked or in order to support that direction. And so you had to be versed and understand the words that they wanted to use and be comfortable with the numbers. And I will tell you that probably one of the biggest challenges for an HR person is that comfort with the financial piece. A lot of HR people aren't numbers people, and you really have to be.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that so much. And what you're getting at is that very first question is, what does it mean to know the business? And knowing the business means that you do have to have a good understanding of the financials. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but one of the other questions is the third one there is, what metrics can you use to connect people data with business outcomes? Because that's really what we're talking about, is how are we supporting the business from an HR initiative perspective to align with company priorities? How are we going to help long-term the company reach those successes? And that means we have to be comfortable with numbers, right? One of the questions that I had is, you know, as HR, for those of us that have been in maybe growing responsibilities, we've been an HR manager type of role, maybe smaller organizations, curious, just by maybe a raise of hand, how many of you have had to ask for example, a new HRIS system from your leadership and ask for the finances in order to purchase something like that? Has anybody had that experience? One of the first things, I've done this in almost every single organization I've worked for. One of the first things that they ask for is, why? Why do we need this? why do you need this? You know, where you're a cost center as it is. You know, your job is to manage the benefits, you know, manage leave, maybe run payroll or something like that. They don't understand, well, why do we need a system to do this? And usually my experience with the C-suite, they don't really respond to the anecdotal because it will make my life easier. You know, I'll be able to do things that I can't do right now. Well, you have to quantify that in some way, right? And so being able to understand from a financial perspective, when we talk about return on investment and metrics and things like that, what are some of the things that you can measure when you're helping to influence the decisions? Because you may not be the decision maker within your organization, but your job as a business partner is to influence those decisions. And that doesn't mean just the business decisions. It also means somebody's asking for control of my screen. I will decline that. So it also means helping the HR department run appropriately, because there is a close connection between the strategic operation of HR and the support of the business and the tactical support of HR, right? They're sort of intertwined. So curious, jumping to what does it mean to know the business? We talked a little bit about the financials. How do you go about that? How might you, and I'm sure you've heard about this in your HR webinars and other things that you've done. What does it mean to know the business? How do you go about knowing the business? Any suggestions?
I can throw out that basically it's getting to know your business partners, right? I work for state government, and so I know who to call in my budget division or my IT division, or I work for the courts. So if I'm working with a particular court, you know, and they have some issues, who else do we need to bring into the conversation that supports whatever outcome we're trying to achieve?
Joanne, you were going to share something.
Yeah, that's basically what I was just gonna say too, is like figuring out who is willing to help you and how to get you the information that you need. Because like I know I'm coming from more of a startup type role, and so it's like I knew everything 3 years ago when it was me and like 4 other people. But now, you know, we brought in other people and there's this whole data set that like I don't know how to do that. That's not my skill set, but like who on that team can help me. I could tell them like what it is that I'm looking for and how can we then gather that data back so then I can like have it either just for my own purposes or then to bring to other leaders or other departments to help build whatever case it may be, like whether it's for the HRIS system or, you know, yeah, any other initiatives that we're looking for.
That's great, Joanna. So one comment on that is, or maybe it's another question that I have for you, is as you're trying to learn who you might need to connect with in order to help you learn some of these things, how would you go about that?
Yeah, it's been a big learning curve for me personally, but asking just lots of questions. Like I've never been someone who shied away from questions. And so I don't mind maybe looking a little bit silly or like owning what I don't know. Like I don't, like with the data specifically, we brought in a whole team that's very data driven. And like I've never worked at a company that had that, which is really, really great. But like I don't know what I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend like I do because they'll figure out very quickly that I don't. And so just letting them be that expert so then I can take it and move it forward with what I know.
Yeah, I love that. It's really a matter of kind of the ownership piece, you know, you owning learning about the business because you don't know what you don't know. And so, and in my experience in working with leaders, they're pretty excited about the fact that if HR is, you know, maybe they don't like you snooping around what they're doing, but if you're asking around about, you know, tell me a little bit more about what you guys do, you know, what are the challenges that you're facing? You know, why do you exist? Who do you serve? You know, those are the same questions to even just basically about your organization. Why does your organization even exist? What is the purpose? What is the mission? How do you operate? How are decisions made within the organizations? Even thinking about, your SWOT analysis. I know some smaller companies haven't done that. Maybe that's something that you can help with the organization to help them think about that future success. What are the current strengths? Where are the weaknesses? What are the opportunities? What are the threats? Just really getting to know some of these things. So some of my favorite questions in working with leaders across my organization. Now I'm embedded in a specific part of the organization. So we're a global company. We have about 6,500 employees or so. My part of the business, I have 640 employees. So it's a pretty sizable part of the organization. And I'm embedded in that business, but it's important that I understand, how do the people that I work with interact with these other functions? What does the workflow look like? What do those partnerships and the collaborations look like? All of these types of questions, getting really, really curious. So absolutely, don't shy away from questions. And it's a great way to learn. And it's a great way to start building those relationships within your organization. Other questions that you can ask are, literally, who is the business? What's your executive leadership look like? What is your C-suite made up of? How many leaders are there? Do you have a board of directors? Are you a publicly traded company? Do you have shareholders? These are some of the questions, just a basic understanding of the organization and how it operates. And then, of course, looking at organizational values, the vision, again, the decision-making priorities. Do they have a long-range plan or a strategic plan? Understanding what the strategic plan is of the business, so that you can come alongside from an HR perspective to help support that.
And don't you think, Kai, that in some cases, some of the questions that you're asking, very good questions, if organizations, depending on how sophisticated we are, that we might have annual reports, that there might be board documents, that there are things on our website, that there are places where some of the answers to these questions exist.
Yes.
And if I'm new to an organization and the HR person, or been there a while and looking for kind of confirmation, I can gather that information. And then one of the things was that Cheryl said, ask a lot of questions. And my add to her was, go on a listening tour.
Yep.
Because there really is this element of is this still true? And are we still doing this? If I'm new to the organization and I'm trying to truly understand who and what we are and why we do what we do and how we got here and where are we going and how can I help you get there? Are these things still true? And how have we manifested them in some fashion so that I can piggyback on any of that? Because I think sometimes we put out stuff and it's been out there a long time and we've kind of
outdated.
We've forgotten it. We're not doing it. Nobody even knows it. They can't recite it. And then the answer is, if it's on our website, are we actually living, walking, talking it? And so being able to, is that reality? Right? I go in and look on LinkedIn and the answer is, that person doesn't work there anymore. They haven't updated anything. Are we doing that like with our board, who our board members are, or just any of those kinds of things? So great questions and dovetailing it in. Is it?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly you want to access the resources that are available to you within your own organization. What is out there? What's been shared, with your board of directors or with your employees? And sometimes that stuff, to your point, is completely outdated. Sometimes it stays on. I know in our organization, this was actually such a requested topic for our employees across the business, because we are so large and they want to have an understanding of how do these other functions in the business sort of operate together? What are the different functions and who's in them and what does that look like? And so we actually created within our intranet know exact sciences. And so every single employee has an opportunity to go and look at all of this stuff. And some of it is our why. Why do we exist? Who are we here to serve? What are some of those stories that motivate us to do the things that we do and why we're so committed to this? And then all the way through our financials and you know, the way that we operate and our organizational structure and all of those things. Absolutely take advantage of the things that you have in front of you. And to your point, Deborah, making sure that that information is accurate. You know, is this still true? When was the last time this was updated? Is this what we want to be true, but maybe it's not actually true? You know, I think about values, you know, companies love to have values on the wall, but we often hear people don't operate with those values in mind. They're not even in alignment. Well, maybe we need to rethink that, you know, and how are we going to do that? And by the way, strategically, that is a great way to partner with your leadership to actually live the values that the organization says they believe in. All right, so moving on, be the bridge. HR is in such a unique position within the organization, really. I mean, aside from maybe from a financial perspective, but it's still payroll, which typically falls under HR, not always. HR is really the only function within a business that touches every single person. So you have not only the opportunity, but I think you have the obligation to be the connector, be the bridge between leaders, between functions. Even if you're not the one that supports another function, like you have got another colleague that is an HR business partner for another group, working together and making sure that, hey, how are we sharing information? Marissa, you have your hand up and I would like to make sure you have an opportunity to ask your question.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm new here. Before you even got to the next slide, what I was thinking is actually sort of a good lead in. I was going to mention, we've talked a lot about the importance of asking a bunch of questions, and I'd like to make 2 points about that. One is that one of the best times to ask questions is when you're new. That's one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was when you're starting a new job is not to pretend like you know much of anything. You want to seem reasonably intelligent, of course, but especially when you're new is when you can't really be expected to know anything. So some things that after someone's been here a while, people might think, oh gosh, you know, they really ought to know that by now. When you're brand new, there's no way you could have. So definitely take advantage of that opportunity. And the other point that I was going to make is to use asking questions as a relationship builder. I've heard it said that a great way to start up conversations with someone is to ask them questions about themselves. I've found that to be true. I'm pretty extroverted and love chit-chatting. So to sort of tie that in, just a little bit about myself. My undergrad major was Latin American and Latino studies. My master's was in HR. I've worked in small nonprofits, startup businesses, and the federal government. And I started my current position nearly 3 years ago as a learning and talent development specialist at a wastewater treatment plant. And there's nothing in my background that says science or environmental studies or anything like that. So as much as I was excited about the idea to do training and learning, my first few weeks here, it was like, how am I going to help anybody learn when I have so much to learn myself? So just being really humble about that and asking questions like, tell me about what you do, and oh, how does that work? How does that work? You know, can you explain that to me? I'm really curious. Or oh wow, that's really great. I've never seen that before. You can ask questions in a way that is almost complimentary. Early on in my career, I guess I've always kind of been a big question asker, but earlier on in my career, in some places, it wasn't necessarily received as well, because I think without realizing it, was sort of giving the impression of being challenging, like, why are you doing it like that? Or, well, how does that work? And it almost seemed to come across a little bit threatening to people, like I was challenging them or disagreeing. So to really be conscious about using those questions in a humble way, and to combine relationship building with the learning has been what's made a really big difference for me here.
Thank
And
you
I guess
for
that's all I had
adding
to
that.
say.
No, that's
Thanks.
great. Thank you. And one of the things that I want to mention is even if you're not new and you don't know, I understand that, you know, some people might actually respond, you know, gosh, you've been here for a while. Why don't you know that? I don't know that most people would, though. You know, I think so. I'll give you an example. You know, you had mentioned this is a new environment for you. There's, you know, kind of a steep learning curve. Same. I don't have a scientific background, but my area of I support the science office. These are PhD scientists, engineers, very intellectual, technical people. And golly, there's a lot for me to learn. I've been here 6 years. I'm still learning. You know, there's a lot to learn. And but they love it. They love when I ask questions because they understand I'm trying to make those connections. And really, when I think about my role as an HR business partner, it's not that I'm always going to have the answers. I'm not. You know, I can come at it from here's what I know about people. Here's what I know about human nature. Here's what I know about what the business is trying to achieve. Now let's work together on what is the specific problem that we're trying to solve within this organization or in whatever the scenario is, and let's problem solve together. You know, my leaders aren't always going to have the answers. I'm not always going to have the answers, but I know when we put our heads together and we really start working on what is, you know, not just that gut reaction, but really more like, hey, let's look at this from a more strategic perspective. What are we trying to solve for? And what do we want that future state to look like? And what are some of the things that we could do now? Maybe leveraging the strengths that we have to help bring up the areas where there are opportunities or weaknesses. And together we can come up with a great plan. We don't have to always have the answer. So don't be afraid. I mean, this is all part of, you know, everybody's learning. And so I love that. I think absolutely. And so kind of going back, it's a good segue for this is being the bridge. The question that I have is, who should you connect with? As an HR business partner, regardless of where you land in the organizational structure or to whom you report or who you're supporting, who should you connect with? What are your thoughts there?
So this is Cheryl. I will tell you that I think you need to connect with everybody. There's no part of the business that is any less or more important. Because that's what makes the business itself, right? So connect with everybody.
Yep. That was exactly what I was going to say. We are HR. We should be connecting with everybody, every leader, every individual contributor. Now, again, I'm in a large organization. Cheryl, I know you mentioned Boeing. You're not going to be able to meet every single person. It's just too big, right? But
No,
everywhere
right, you make the comment though, you are embedded within your team, right? And so was I.
Yep.
And I can so understand what Marissa said. When you get into a team, I'm not an engineer, and yet I worked with 300 engineers. Well, they're scared to death of HR. And so how are you going to be that bridge and help establish your credibility and build the relationships if you're not out? I wandered around. It was funny. It was almost like little moles, ducking and hiding when I would walk through the cube land, right? But I would walk up and I would say, similar to what Marissa, like, hey, what are you doing on your computer? That's really cool. What is that? Well, you learn a lot. But you also then develop that relationship with them, and you humble yourself down. But then if you understand what goes on in the other parts of the company, as you understand more what they do and what their goal is, you can say, well, over here, this is how they would see that. And have you talked to them? Have you, and so then you can, sometimes that's a cost savings feature, right? It's like, why reinvent the wheel? So it is interesting, but I do think that you need to build your relationships across the entire organization, even though you may really be embedded in just one team.
Yep, that's right. And you know who the leaders are, you know who the decision makers are within the organization. And so sometimes, to your point, if let's say I'm working with a leader within my organization and they're talking to me about a problem that they're trying to solve. And I know, like, gosh, if you talk to this leader over in this organization. They might be able to help you either because they have some knowledge there or because they are already collaborators, but they hadn't really thought about, you know, hey, maybe I could partner with that part of the business that could help me solve this problem, right? The other thing is, so you mentioned, and it's on the slide here, establishing credibility. So one of the things that I think about, and Cheryl, you just kind of touched on it, when a lot of times this happens very, very frequently in organizations. HR walks in the room, conversation stops, everybody's like, shh, HR's come in, you know, they duck, they don't want to engage. I mean, first of all, if that's happening, that means their experience with HR has not been positive, right? So if you're in that environment, my guess is that HR hasn't established credibility because people are hiding from you, right?
Yep.
So the question that I have then, you know, for this whole group is, do you know if you have credibility with your organization and with your leaders? How would you find that out? You know, to me, that it is part of your personal brand as an HR professional. How do you, maybe asking this a different way, are you someone that decision makers want at their table? And how do you know that? For those of us that have been in HR for a long time, I remember when, I want to say this was probably 15 years ago, when we really started hearing, you know, HR demanding a seat at the table, a seat at the table, a seat at the table. In some organizations, you know, they highly value HR, you're invited in. Other organizations, not so much. Other organizations, maybe you were a part of the table, but now you're not. And the question that I have is, why would that be the case?
I think people reach out when they know that you're a person that will find the answer or get the resource and not just like shut the door and say no. I find that I get a lot of people that come to me because they know that I'll take something all the way to the end of resolution, you know, like what do you need to get this thing done, or do you have a resource? And there's a few people in my office that really like, that's really our goal, is to get the answers that people are asking. So you become the go-to person. And that's happened. I have 24 years with state government. And people in other agencies at times reach out to me and say, hey, you have some resources we can take a look at. So
thanks, Gail. What other thoughts do you have? In your organization as an HR professional, are you invited to the table? You know, whether it's the C-suite or if you're embedded in the business or you oversee a certain area, are you invited? You know, do they ask you to come in? Deborah, you were gonna add.
My apologies. I must have froze or something happened because you all froze. So I don't know what happened. So it must be on my end. I was actually thinking about something that you said earlier and piggybacking on Gail's statement and something that Cheryl is saying in the chat box in terms of when people reach out to you, when you bring value.
Yeah.
If you're not bringing value, and how do you demonstrate the value? And also a key word for me over the last couple of years is intentionality. What are we doing with intention to build trust, right? To bring that value, to communicate what we're communicating. To your comment earlier, though, when we think about what we're doing and why we're doing it and why we're here, that HRIS system, one of the tips that I was shared many, many years ago, when we ask for something in HR and we say things like, it will make my life easier, the answer is, do not say that. It's not about me. It's not about HR. It is about what will deliver for others. So this will be a benefit to the employees in this region this way, this how, something. I can now collect the data, the information. I can be faster to give you the numbers that you need, to give you the data to support the decisions that you're making. So being able to know then who are your decision makers, being able to know who they are from a personality or communication style, giving them. And so when I say listening to her, what are their questions? What is it that they like to know or need to know? And that we're delivering that information in their method, not ours, and that we're like last on the list. And if we do a really good job of delivering it the way they want and need it, we'll get our needs met. We're just putting them on a higher pecking order, because if we meet their needs, we're demonstrating to them we do understand the business, we understand them, we've got the stuff that they need, and if we can give it better, faster, more efficient, more whatever, we've got them, and we've got them where we want them, but we're giving it to them the way they want it. Now we're talking their language, not our language.
Yeah. One of the things that I learned, and some of you may be familiar with Jennifer McClure. She has a podcast and she's a speaker, really wonderful human. And she does a session on personal brand. And I attended this session some years ago, and one of the stories that she told was really, really powerful to me. And it was on this topic of, the seat at the table, where she was working for an organization. She used to have a seat at the table and she didn't have a seat at the table. And she had gone to the leader saying, hey, how come I'm not in those meetings anymore? And they literally told her, we don't want you there. And her response was, why? And they said, because you say no. You are the no person. And this happens, right? With HR. I think a lot of times people come in and we have compliance, we have employment law, we have all these things in our head. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. Leaders don't want to hear that. It's not about saying no. It's about saying, okay, before we move forward, again, what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and what can we do? Instead of saying, no, we can't do that, say, maybe there's another way that we can do this. Maybe, that's one of my favorite things when I'm working with a leader. I do not want to be the one to say to them, thou shalt do it this way, or no, you cannot do that. It's really more like, okay, how can we think about this differently? What is something that we can do? And I always want to ask the question for HRB, why would you say no? I mean, unless it truly is, like, if it's unethical, it's illegal, whatever, like, certainly those are lines that you can draw. But I will tell you, the vast majority of the things that we deal with are not in that category. They really aren't, unless you're in a really, really toxic environment. That's a whole different thing. Let's talk about that offline. And I will encourage you. But that's not the case in most of our jobs, right? So just think about those things. And then one of the other things that we were talking about is, making the data informed decisions. What are some of the things that we can measure? So for some of us that are in larger organizations and we have sophisticated systems, there's all kinds of things that we can measure, probably more than we really care to even acknowledge. Just so much freaking data. Which is awesome. I'm a total data nerd, so I love it. But what do you do in a smaller organization where maybe you don't have access to that same sophisticated system, or you're not even sure what you should be measuring? What are some of the things that you think about, either in your current role or a prior role, or some of the things that you would like to be measuring? What are some of those things that might be helpful to the business? Yep. Deborah just added in the chat that SHRM says that there are over 500 metrics that we can measure in HR. Holy crap.
Right? It's like 570 some odd somethings. And
yep.
And I think people should answer your question. My statement is, that's one of our questions to ask each of those people.
Yep.
What is it that is important to you? What is it you'd like me to measure? Or what are you measuring now? Because then that's what we can incorporate into our stuff, or part of that HRIS, if it's feasible, if our system can do that. Right?
The other thing is, so let me take this in another direction. It's not just, and I agree with you, yes, and you do ask your leaders and organizational, decision makers, what are some of the things that you would like to measure? What could we measure? There's also opportunity. So thinking on, we are an organization that utilizes a lot of surveys. We survey our employees a lot. And we utilize this data a lot. We also share this data with our employees. So they actually are fairly, for the most part, enthusiastic about surveys, because they are excited to see what the results are, because they also know that we're going to take this information and try to do something with it for those areas that are of opportunity. So what might be, thinking about, for instance, the Gallup engagement survey. They have the Q12, and then there's a handful of other custom questions that you can make. And we're watching these, year over year, we're watching ups and downs and things like that. Sometimes we're not even sure what we're trying to measure. In our organization, one of the areas that, a few years ago, it came as it was a really low area on the topic of recognition. People didn't feel recognized. Well, how people talk about that might be different. What is recognition to you might be different for me. And so really there's not a one size fits all. But when you really start working with your leaders and your employees and the team and really digging into some of these things, you start seeing trends. Maybe you start seeing things. Is this really a systemic organizational issue? Is this an issue just specifically within this team? What are some of the things that we could do differently? And so there's lots of ways that you can take a look at, not just your standard, these are things that we typically will measure within HR, but thinking with your leaders on what are some of the problems that we're trying to solve, and what are some of the things that we could potentially measure that might have impact on how we're making decisions around that thing, right? That particular problem. So something along those lines. Some of the things that in our organization, I'm just looking at a list of things that I put together. KPIs in our organization, we have dashboards and we measure things. Performance dashboard. I know there's been some comments in here about turnover, retention, cost to hire, cost to retain. I think of when I'm looking at attrition in our organization, we're not just thinking about the people leaving the organization, but also why and what is the type of attrition? Is it involuntary turnover? Like, are we making bad hires? Are we making bad hiring decisions and putting people in places that's not a great match for them? They're not performing well. Are we seeing attrition in regrettable loss? These are people that are leaving the organization that you would like to retain, but you're unable to, right? We don't want to see that kind of loss. Early exits. Are you hiring people and then they're turning around and leaving the organization within, 30, 60, 90 days? Other reasons for exit. Are they leaving because their manager? Are they leaving because the work environment? Are they leaving, for family reasons? Compensation? I mean, there's a number of things, but unless you really drill down and start asking some of those questions why people are leaving, then you can start seeing the trends and maybe addressing some of the questions from a strategic perspective. All right, so just taking a look at time, I just want to make sure that we kind of keep things moving. Oops, pushed on that. All right. So one of the things that I hear often within my organization is, well, what is strategic HR? What is it? What does it mean to be strategic? Here's all the things that I have to do. I'm pushing these papers and this is due on this time and I have to make these changes within our HRIS system at a certain time and running payroll and things like that. But what does it mean to be strategic HR? Deborah, I want to go back to your question. If you do not know, Gallup Q12, question I say, okay, perfect. Okay, sorry, I wasn't sure if that was a question or not. So I wanted to show kind of a quick, and this is very high level, very general. What is the difference between tactical and strategic HR? So when I think about strategic HR, really, HR in general has to strike a balance between the strategic and the tactical. You can't just be working on the strategic and not have the tactical. Like, we know, but there are things that payroll needs to be run. We know that benefits need to be renewed and there's paper that we need. And when somebody's terminated, there's stuff that's related to that. When you're onboarding, there's stuff that's related to that, that's time bound, that you need to pay attention to in the tactical. But really, when we look at it from a high level, tactical is typically this is how we do it. Here's our process, here's our procedure. The strategic is really the what and the why. It's more of that long-term, visionary, future-focused perspective. One of the questions that I think about from a tactical versus strategic is, you know, can we? So maybe you have a leader that says, hey, I want to promote this person. Can we? Yes. That's tactical. Strategic is, should we? Is this the right thing to do for the business? Deborah added, what would you add to this list? Are there other things that you think about from a tactical versus strategic perspective that you might add to this? Deborah, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I'm just here to ask the questions, Kai.
That's funny.
I think when you're looking strategically, you also want to understand whether all facets of the business are moving in the same direction. You know, certainly you get into your tactical, which I see kind of can silo you because the decisions are made independently and they're all over here and you're trucking along. But when you get into strategy, or when you get into that side of the business, you talk about collaborative and solutioning and future focused. But as we look in those areas, are we all going in the same direction? Is that the goal?
Yep.
So that we can then move on a longer term plan versus day to day or year to year even. Are you looking at 5 and 10? Right.
Excellent.
See, and I think there's a piece here, you know, Cheryl, with your comments is also this element of, I don't usually consider myself a very detail oriented person. And yet when I see this, then all of a sudden my mind goes to, okay, so does everybody know what their role is? And then how are we going to do some of these things? How is that being accomplished? Because these long-term kinds of things, well, what's the definition of long-term? And are we bringing in specialists for certain things? Are we bringing in temporaries to do some things? Are we going to outsource anything? And I don't even just mean from an HR standpoint, just in general, right? And so how are we getting there? Are we going to be buying organizations to do the growth? Are we going to be segmenting and parceling out our operation and doing different things to get to these things? And so then it's kind of like, how big picture are we talking about, right? And so there's this element of every organization thinks of, when we say strategic, I don't even know that people define strategic or strategy the same way. And so can we make sure that we're on the same page about what that looks like?
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, just in and of itself. I often keep a pretty good tab on things that are happening just within HR, what jobs are available, what the market looks like. And I often see business partner jobs posted. And then you go into the body and it tells you here are the essential duties, and it is not HR business partner. It's like HR operations. It's tactical HR. It's not a partnering role. And so I think even, you know, it's kind of a buzzy term, business partner. That sounds awesome and sexy. And, you know, maybe we'll attract the right candidate to get that. Well, I promise you, if you are an HR business partner that likes to operate at the strategic, that type of role is going to be a good fit for you. So, you know, it's one of those things that sometimes we need to also educate our leaders on what these terms mean. You know, it's not just a buzzword. It's not just going to attract the right kind of candidate that you think you want, but you really need to think that, hey, there's a reason why we call these HR business partners versus an HR manager or HR operations or compensation or whatever the case may be. All right, I know we only have a few minutes left and I want to leave some time at the end, not just for questions, but I do have a couple of scenarios. But I wanted to add a list of HR competencies. This is not an exhaustive list. These are things that I thought about from a high level. You know, what would be important for an HR business partner to know in order to be effective in their role. And one of the first things I thought of was being, and I'm going to steal this from Steve Brown, is a change catalyst. It's not change management. Yes, you do need to support change management within your organization, but we already know change is a constant. It's a constant. And it's so funny to me because if you're in an organization that refuses to change, we hate it, right? Don't we all hate when we're saying, hey, why don't we try it this way? No, we do it this way because this is the way it's always done. We all hate it. But then when there's change, we hate that too. So really, we just need to be comfortable with the fact that, hey, change is going to happen and that's okay. The goal is, how can we make change more comfortable? How can we make it more successful? How can we lead from the front, encourage people to say, hey, y'all, it's not so bad up here. Come on, and helping your leaders help manage the change within those organizations. So being a catalyst. And then obviously some of these other things. As you look down this list of things, some of this we've already talked about. Is there anything else that you would add to a competency that you feel an HR business partner should have? The chronic curiosity, I also stole that from Sarah Noel Wilson. She's a speaker and a leadership coach. She has a book called Don't Feed the Elephants, which, by the way, at the end of this, I have some resources. So Deborah, I'll send out my slide deck to you and you can share it out as you feel appropriate. But her whole business is around that chronic curiosity. So again, it's kind of tying that back to asking a bazillion questions. And in my mind, there's no bad questions. You can ask me anything and I'll ask anything. I don't care. I don't care if it makes me feel stupid. I don't feel stupid. I feel curious. Is there anything else that you would add here? So double emphasis on the business acumen, understanding the levers that can be pulled to further the business. Absolutely. Business acumen is a funny, it's kind of one of those buzz terms, business acumen, and then it's really, well, what does that actually mean? And I think it kind of depends on what the business that you're in. And really, it's tying that back to knowing the business, understanding the finances, understanding marketing, understanding the why your organization exists, who are your customers, understanding who are your leaders and what are the terms that they utilize, and so that you can kind of use that same similar language when you're chatting with them. What else? Is there anything else you would add to this?
I would just go ahead, please. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Cheryl.
The one thing I was just going to say with regard to the business acumen is just, I think I made a move from Boeing, public or private sector, over to a county, a government. And so the change in business structure and the change in how, you don't have revenue drivers, if you will, like the levers that you can pull. You don't build another widget to make more money. Your strategies are entirely different. And I think really understanding and diving into those differences will be beneficial to you as an HR person throughout your career, because that's how these other organizations all do business. And you need to understand those differences, especially when you start getting into the strategic and partnering pieces.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Deborah, you were going to add?
Well, I was going to say two things. One, from a Cheryl standpoint, and be thoughtful whether or not you're good with that in terms of the way they do business, or the structure of government versus not-for-profit versus private, and whether that's for you with those informational interviews and such, because I know that I probably would struggle with working for government. Sometimes it's slow and sometimes there's a lot of red tape, and that's just not my style. I don't like a lot of rules. Welcome to HR, Deborah. But just being thoughtful about that sort of thing. The thing I would add to this list, though, that's been a thing for me for years and years and years, and this actually doesn't really come from me. This comes from Judy Clark, who used to own HR Answers, is what she used to call environmental scanning. Is know a little bit about a lot of things. This is the element of knowing what's going on in the outside world and how it does impact your business. So like when the gas prices go up, does that have anything to do with your business? Does that impact your drivers and the cost of things? Because that is part of your business, or it really doesn't. What's going on overseas? does that impact your business? And so that also means when we talk about networking and outside our business, because I think it's huge to have connections and relationships in a variety of areas outside our business. Do you know what's going on in the outside world and with other organizations and how they do business, so that you can bring that to your place of employment or elevate the conversations to know what's going on? So it's not just knowing your business, but it's understanding business and what's being impacted, because that shows credibility also.
Yeah, absolutely. That was an excellent ad, Deborah. One of the things that I don't know if we still have it, but we had a training for our HR business partners and leaders that we called Look In, Look Out, Look About. And it was just exactly that. It was really about, you know, what's happening within our industry? What are some of the things that might impact the way that we're able to do this? And even even from an HR perspective, when I think about all of the change that has happened in the market from a recruiting perspective from 2019 until current, right? 2020 was like that just exploded. And then it was like everybody got laid off, and then the economy exploded, and we had, you know, quiet quitting, and we had all of this stuff, and then people were changing jobs like crazy. And now the market has tightened up, and now there's more layoffs, and now people aren't really good. Now it's more like, you know, what do they call it? Quiet vacationing or quiet staying or something. You know, I mean, there's all these things. There's so much change that has happened. And as HR professionals, now I'm not a recruiter. Thank God I'm not a recruiter, not my thing at all. But it's my job to understand what's happening in the market that impact the groups that I'm supporting, impact the pipeline of talent that's coming into my organization. What are some of the things that are impacting that? You know, what's making it difficult? How are we getting the right people? How are we developing the right people? So I know we're out of time. I do, at the end of this, I had a couple of scenarios that I thought would just be fun, and I'll let you guys kind of read through these again. I will send these out to Deborah, and she can share with you guys these different scenarios. But these are just some of the things that real life scenarios where I've had to work with leaders on kind of how to manage this from a strategic perspective. And it's just kind of fun. I've also added ways that you can connect with me. If there's things that you are questioning, or you just want some help, or if there's any connecting points that I can help you with, feel free to reach out to me at any time. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm also on X and Instagram. Also on Facebook. I have that kind of tightened down because it's kind of inappropriate most of the time. So we'll just leave that where it is. And then I also added some resources here. I'm a huge listener of podcasts. I love podcasts. And so there's a pile of podcasts that I've listed here, and then some. And then I also added some books that have been really, really helpful. None of these are really specific to HR partnering. They're on communication, on leadership, on business, on you know, your own personal growth, and in some cases, just like with this Tuesdays with Maury, just a reminder of you know, being loving and kind. And when I think about what we do in HR, what we do is people. People are our business, and let's keep that in perspective. There is business, but when you take care of your people, the business will take care of itself. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate the invitation, Deborah. I hope this was helpful for all of you. Feel free to connect, and thank you.
Thank you, Kai. I really appreciate it. And these resources, I will tell you that I'm familiar with all but one of these. And the answer is, you know, 5 stars or 3 thumbs up or whatever is appropriate here. And I found some great information from the conversation, and I hope all of you did as well. And I think one of the things that is a real plus about this is that we recorded this. So you will have an opportunity. The link will be sent to you when we refine that and send it out, because I think some of this went by kind of fast. And so you'll be able to listen to it again if you want to. You'll be able to share it with others, and especially with those case study scenarios at the back end. I think you can take those back to your departments and have conversations with others and bring them up and say, and maybe tweak them a little bit to maybe more specifics inside your organization, and talk a little bit about what we would do or how we would do it, or even with your own network and being able to utilize those. So I think even though we might not have talked about those here, I think those can be useful in a variety of ways. So special thank you again. I'm so glad you were able to join us, Kai. And to everybody else, thanks for joining us. Our next program will be on August 7th. And again, just FYI, especially because a couple of you are new, first Wednesday of every month is when we get together at 12 noon. We always have different topics. I'm always interested in knowing what topics might be meaningful to you for us to be able to talk about. So we don't plan too far in advance on most of these so that we can be a little bit more timely. And I just want to say thanks again for everybody for joining us and chiming in both verbally and in the chat box. We had some good dialogue on both accounts. So if there are other questions, I always encourage people to stick around. I'll call it officially on the recording piece of that, but we can still chat and network afterwards. But if you need to go, then you need to go, because we know you've got stuff to take care of as well. So for this one, we'll call that the end of the July HR Lunch Bunch. Thanks again for joining us.